I live in the southern United States, and I can't help noticing that people are happier. I mean, when I arrived in Britain a few days ago on my fleeting visit,
you live in Mississippi, the poorest state in America.
which is now richer than Britain in per capita GDP terms.
You're joking.
I'm not. The Mississippi, the poorest state in America, overtook the United Kingdom in per capita GDP terms in 2003. Now, I know the think tank that I work for.
Why they're so happy now?
Actually, weirdly, it's the opposite of that. I think people in the southern United States, despite being richer than the British, are so happy precisely because they're less materialistic, they're less materially obsessed. The culture there is church attendance is very, very high. People don't say, do you go to church? They say, where do you go to church? Churches compete with each other. They're full. They have multiple services. I don't think it's a complete coincidence that society, and it's not just that, Friday night football games are absolutely full. Everyone comes and watches, whether you play football or not. Everyone plays a part. There's this great sense of community involvement. There's this great sense of being part of a club. It might be a tennis club. It might be the football club. It might be the school Patriot Pack. Everyone is part of a social fabric that I think has worn away here. And I think I certainly noticed this as a Brit living in Mississippi. People in Mississippi tend to be, I think, happier. Children tend to be happier. They're much better behaved. I notice young children far less prone to tantrums. Teenagers tend to look you in the eye and be much more balanced and happier. Young girls, and I'm the father of a daughter, tend to be uncomplicatedly feminine. Boys tend to be uncomplicatedly masculine. I don't think they've had this idea that masculinity is toxic beaten into them, or that somehow being feminine should be a source of embarrassment. They're less neurotic. In Britain, everyone greets you with some anxiety, some concern. This time it's the riots. On previous occasions when I visited Britain, it's concern about Ukraine or whatever the neurosis of the day happened to be. They're much more well-rounded there. And I think perhaps because they have a belief system that doesn't put the media and their Twitter feed at the center of the universe. I arrived in Mississippi at the height of the COVID lockdowns. And it was an extraordinary shift to go from a neurotic society where people policed themselves down to the last inch as to where they should stand from one another. And they wore these face masks, not based on science, but some sort of voodoo belief that would protect them. And where people would stand on their doorsteps and applaud a state agency for insisting that they be incarcerated in their own home in order to protect the state agency. I went from that society to a society where people were much calmer, more rational, and had faith in God. And I thought, who are the rational ones? I am very happy in the United States. I think that is where the citadel of liberty is, and where the fight for liberty needs to be won more than anywhere else. You know, if American exceptionalism is maintained, if we prevent the progressives in America reducing the United States to being a North American version of France or Belgium, then the United States will endure and liberty will endure. And if the United States once again has to come to the old world to rescue the old world from the nasty isms that the old world constantly creates, you know, that's my fight. I wish people here well. I'll do what I can, but I'm committed to fighting for freedom and liberty in Mississippi. And if I may say, in 3.5 years in Mississippi, I think I've been able to achieve more than I was able to achieve, Brexit aside, in 12 years in Britain. When I talk to conservatives in Mississippi about tax cuts, they actually want to know the details so that they can draft a bill. When I talk to people in Mississippi about how we can tackle DEI ideology, you can actually have a proper impactful conversation. When I talk to people in Mississippi about universal school choice, I remember once having a conversation with Michael Gove when he was Shadow Education Minister about the need for universal school choice. I said, charter schools or free schools are great. Extending Labour's academy program is great. But you realize this is all reversible. When you get a Labour majority government, they can undo all the things you're doing, all the good work you're doing on the curriculum. And sure enough, it's come to pass. Mm-hmm. I said to him, and I remember it clearly, we were sitting in a corridor in the House of Commons. I said, what you need to do is give parents control over their child's share of education funding. If Gove had done that 10 years ago, these would be irreversible changes. You would have changed the education system in this country for the better, and you would have changed the cultural assumptions within the education system in a more conservative direction. No willingness to do it, no appetite for doing it. I have these conversations with politicians in Mississippi, and they are enthused and excited about all this. A good life hack is to go where you're appreciated.
I appreciate that honesty. What you're saying resonates because, I mean, it's quite something to hear someone with such a successful political career as yours to say such a thing. But it seems to me that it's not just in the political sphere, but entrepreneurs are going to start leaving the country. As we hear, taxes are going up. The possibilities to get things done. Yes, America is very alluring because it's especially being a Brit.
Particularly the southern United States. I mean,
yeah, where there's real freedom.
Yeah, and the southern United States is something extraordinary is happening there. It is becoming
Texas is unbelievable. What's happening in Texas?
It is the place where human innovation is now happening, and the pace of improvement and innovation in the southern United States is accelerating. It's like being in Sacramento in the 1950s or being in the Dutch Republic in the 1600s.
I genuinely have one way I see this playing out, and might sound ludicrous, is this is like the fall of Rome, and Rome is now moving to Constantinople, and it's somewhere in the southern states. That might be, I mean, we laugh at it, but it's not necessarily out of the question. But what's